Hi, Trustee Yalini. My name is Anisha, and on behalf of the Morningside Heights Neighborhood Association, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Anisha. I'm really excited to be here.
Of course. So today's discussion is going to center around COVID-19 and the impact on schools and the community. So to start, what measures is the TDSB taking to effectively manage the spread of COVID-19 among staff and students in schools, and specifically with Brookside Public School?
I think when looking at the board, there are different things that we're doing outside of the school, but I think the most important thing is looking at school by school, who's entering it and what kind of health like safety precautions are they taking, because we can set up a lot of safety precautions within the school, but it's really important that when people are entering, whether they're students or teachers, that they are healthy and they're not going to put others at risk. So I think the very first step is the screening process that we do every day. So whoever enters a school building, teachers or students, they're required to do the screening at home. So with our students, they have a screening pass where on the pass it shows the different levels of symptoms. So we have level 1 symptoms that are more severe, like loss of breathing, loss of smell, difficulty breathing, a cough. And if students have these one of these symptoms, then they're required to stay home, self-isolate, and get a test done. And then we have level 2 symptoms, which are more runny nose, a headache, a sore throat. And if students have one of these symptoms, then the expectation is that they would stay home. They would wait to see if their symptoms get better, and then they're able to return after 24 hours. However, if it doesn't improve, or if they have one or more of these symptoms, then they're required to do a test. So I think that is really important, because sometimes I think, with our younger students, they get sick easy or they have a runny nose. And sometimes we think, oh, it's just a runny nose. But we have to be so careful when students have any of these symptoms, just because when they're at school, they may come in close contact to someone else, and then we don't want to expose them to someone and get them sick, or get exposed to someone and then get sick. So that screening process is the first step. We're ensuring that all of our students, unless they have a medical a reason, that they are wearing their masks, their social distancing. We made sure that our heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems are up to date, because we want to make sure we're introducing new air into the space each time. And some of our schools, as you may know, the windows can't open. So that's always a challenge when our school buildings are older. Brookside, on the other hand, is a bit more new, so that's always good to hear. But looking at Brookside specifically, Principal Allison and Vice Principal Serbos are amazing. They're very well aware of how the school functions and the way that it's constructed. So in some schools, they have the ability to have two-way traffic where students can come one way or another, but some schools are smaller or designed in a way where where that's not possible. So before school started, Principal Allison was great in looking at what method would work best for Brookside. And they also made sure to cohort groups. So not everyone's outside at the same time for recess. They're cohorted to groups so that they can minimize interactions between one another. So while the TDSB has set out broader guidelines, school by school, things look differently, because our principals know best about how the school looks like and what their student body looks like.
Absolutely. So what resources is the TDSB providing to keep teachers, students, and also parents informed about the COVID-19 procedures and protocols in schools?
Mm-hmm. I think from when we started this whole process of planning back to school, I think it was maybe June, July, till now, our plans keep changing. And how we imagined back to school to look like in the summer was completely different to how it happened and how it looks now. So it's very evident that things keep changing. And what I would tell families, the best point of contact is the principal, because they are aware of what policies are being changed at the board level, and they know best at how it's going to be implemented at their school. And another thing is, every school looks different. The number of students who are registered at that school but are attending school virtually versus virtually versus in person, it's different school by school. So the principals know best on how the guidelines will impact their own school. So I think so far, principals have reported back that they have a very good rapport with their parents. Parents know to check in with the principal. So the principal is great. For parents who want to know more about the whys we are doing certain things, then our TDSB website is a great resource. We have all the latest updates, and we also go kind of deeper into why we are doing certain things. And of course, your trustees, because trustees are your community voice at the board. And we do bi-weekly meetings with our senior staff, and we get to ask them questions, and we get to really see why things are happening. And we also get weekly updates from our director. So we have a great idea of what's happening. So you can ask any questions to your trustee as well.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much. What are some social and/or financial resources that the TDSB is providing to support students and parents who are opting for the remote learning option?
Our virtual schools are quite the piece of work. It's actually the demand and the challenges that comes with is quite big. The TDSB is one of the largest school boards in Canada, and as you can imagine, the number of students we look after is quite large as well. And we also found that our virtual school, the demand for that was quite big as well. And looking in areas in Scarborough, like in our ward, for example, 51%, nearly half of our students are in virtual schools. So that's a very big chunk of our numbers. And when looking specifically at Brookside, 55% are attending school in person, and 41% is attending school virtually. This was the numbers at the start of the school year. So the leftover at that point were people we didn't hear back from, students we didn't hear back from. So looking at that, we know that the demand for resources is going to be quite big because of the students that make up virtual school. From our data, it showed us that most of our students that are attending school virtually are from South Asian families. That is the highest demographic. The next is the East Asian community. And we also saw that families from lower socioeconomic households are attending virtual schools. So that shows that a lot of families from underserved communities who have greater challenges and barriers are in virtual schools. So we knew that we had to provide more support to our students there. So of course, when it comes to mental health resources, so social work, guidance counselor, of course, child and youth workers, we all have all those resources that are offered virtually, as well as attendance counselor. So I think attendance is a really big thing because before we went into this whole COVID thing last year, even, I'm sure there were students that weren't engaged, that had other barriers, and I think an added stress is added when during a time of a pandemic. So it's about making sure we have a close eye on our students that we're not engaging and don't feel safe while at school, especially if that's virtually. The distance, I think, causes a far bigger stress on them. And we have attendance counselors who check in and see how we can better support our students. Since we're about 3 months into virtual schools, I think we have a better understanding of how it works and what challenges are, and it's being communicated to the senior level as well. And that's the biggest challenge with what we're dealing with right now, because we don't have experience with it. And we saw last year when schools closed and we kind of pivoted into virtual learning, it wasn't working out. So that's why this year we established 4 virtual schools for elementary and then 1 for high school, in an attempt to make it more engaging for students. But I think we're seeing other challenges, right, when it comes to devices. And in a community like Brookside, where there's a lot more students engaged online in virtual schools, and they're from families with more barriers and who may come from lower to middle income households, the need for devices might be greater. And when that's the case, there's more need for devices. And I think the device issue is really big. We've pulled so many devices from schools last year and we're distributing it, but now we have students in virtual schools as well as in person. So with 2 different sets of learning, it's really challenging to see how the devices are being distributed as well.
So building off of my last point, do you feel that the COVID-19 budget process adequately addresses the needs of all students? And what are some ways that the TDSB ensures that the budget equitably supports all learners during this time?
That's a really good question. So with the budget process, I think the challenge is when we are provided funding that is not enough to fund all the programs and services we'd like to provide, then it becomes a challenge because we need to cut, and that money needs to come from somewhere. And I think that's when we see the different areas and different regions of Toronto and how they work. For example, when it came to one year we had to when French transportation was on the table for a possibility to be cut, we saw some communities that were able to still function because they had a lot of access to French programming. But in areas in Scarborough where we don't have that same access, then if we got rid of transportation, would that mean some schools wouldn't have access to French? Like, that is the reality of it. So definitely when it comes to the budget process, it shows us where the inequities lie. Mm-hmm. And that's when it's important to have those conversations among the board and kind of show that it's inequitable. And that's when we need to push to be more accountable to our communities. And a good example is prior to last year, we have 5 schools offering the IB program. And while other school boards charged IB fees, the TDSB didn't. Mm. But at one point, during our budget process, we saw that we couldn't find that money, so we said that we would charge IB fees going forward. And in the last year, we heard from a lot of our parents, and they made it very vocal, and they advocated on behalf of themselves, saying that it's families that are from underserved communities, it's families that are from lower income, racialized communities that are part of this community. So how can we charge them? And they were very vocal. And being in a time of pandemic, it just makes it a lot harder, right? And this year we decided to suspend the fees, so those families were refunded. So it shows that while the process, it's not as if it's done on purpose. I think since amalgamation, we've been seeing a lot of long-term consequences of the inequities that existed, and when it comes to access to resources and support. And I think now we are in the process of rectifying it. We do have conversations about redistribution. We do have conversations about how do our secondary programs, how should they be improved, and what type of programming needs to be brought to them, and what resources are lacking in Scarborough. Like, these are ongoing conversations. And while the budget process does bring light to it, I think it's during these budget times that we get to have those difficult conversations and ask where the money is going and where the money should go.
Mm-hmm. And that brings me to my last question. With the significant rise in cases in the province and specifically in the Scarborough community, is there the possibility that Christmas break could be extended? And if this is the case, should students expect to return back to school, or should parents be preparing for a return to solely online learning?
So I think with the latest update was that the Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce, mentioned that they would not be extending Christmas break. At the start in September of the school year, I was also kind of between both sides of, should students return to school? Is it safe? Mm-hmm. And some of the arguments were students need to be back in spaces where they're engaged, they're around a caring and safe adult, and it's better for their own child development and their own development that they're in spaces and they're back in school. And I understood that. Mm-hmm. But what's really hard for me is that I was actually hoping that the break would be extended. I think we all know that January is going to be a very scary time. I think we're expecting case count to be really high with it being cold and flu season and many other variables. So at a time like that, I was hoping that students can remain at home for a longer period, because there are a number of schools that have high number of positive cases, right, of active cases. So when that's the case, I think having an extended school break would have been great. It's quite unfortunate that it's not being offered, especially at a time like this when we're heading into so much uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And the impact I'm quite nervous about. In terms of how parents can prepare for months ahead, there may be a time when they announce that schools will be shut down. That again comes from the province. That's a decision made by the province. And if they were to do that, then we would have to pivot into remote learning. What we've been told is that since all of our students are already on Brightspace, whether they're doing remote learning or in person, that switch will be more smoother than it was last year. Okay. But again, until we get to that bridge, this is all what we are thinking. Who knows what will happen when we get there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Trustee. It was so wonderful speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Anisha. It was great speaking to you too.